All right. Hello, guys. Welcome to the exam review. I'm going to paste this cover here a bit. Welcome to the exam review for winter 2025 MHR 523 says Human Resource Management midterm review. What we're doing is taking up last year's midterm. Um, we've covered 6 chapters so far: strategic human resource management, job analysis and design, human resource planning, legal requirements, and diversity, equity, and inclusion requirement, recruitment and selection. Okay. 6 chapters. There's 10 questions per chapter. Um, 100% multiple choice. So what I'm going to do over this review is I'm going to take up 4 questions per chapter that I had on last year's exam. Okay. As I go through it, I'm going to talk about each one, give you the solution, talk about the rationale, things that are similar to it that you might want to think about as you're writing your exam. So let's go through chapter by chapter. There we go. Okay, so we start off with the jobs versus positions question. This is something that, ooh, what I say, like 60, 70% of the students get wrong. So let's go through this, okay? So my tip, this is a bit of a, where are we going? So my tip, as this is a rather large question to read, what I do is I do jobs first, right? Because you can see it's either 4 or 8 jobs that are indicated. What I do is I underline all of the jobs, okay? So a company consists of a variety of roles. The software development manager, so each job is a collection of people or a collection of work. Okay. So software development manager. Okay. And then there's 6 software developers. So this is maybe even one. You can even number them too. Two, the developers is 2. Are responsible for blah, blah, blah. Product manager is 3. Supported by 2. Product analyst is 4. Blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, the quality assurance specialist is 5. Okay, so based on this, we assume it's going to be 8. Let's keep counting. QA testers, 6. Functionality, blah, blah, blah. Lastly, the IT support coordinator, 7. Sports, 6. Technicians, 8. Any more who provide blah, 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 blah. How many jobs, positions? Okay, so there's 8 jobs, okay? So we know from that, cross off this, cross off this. Okay. So based on this, we know that for every job there's at least one position. Okay. So we can cross this off right off the list. Okay. What we don't know is how many positions there are. In order to count the positions, a position is a person. So every person has a different position. So we just need to count the number of people involved. Okay. One trick with this is remember that some of these have numbers, right? So 6, great. Some of them do not have numbers. So just don't forget about those guys, okay? So software development manager, let's go 1 plus 6 software developers. And then we have another project manager. I'm just gonna do this. 1 supported by 2 product analysts. Okay, and then we have, where's this one? Well, sure, supported by 4. And then we got the IT support coordinator supported by 6. Okay, so let's see. So this is, my math is good. 10, 18, 22. Hey, there's my math. Okay, that's how I would tackle that question. What is the primary focus of strategic human resource management, SHRM? Okay, so the big thing that I want to highlight here is whenever we talk about strategic, this is organizational, this is higher goals. These are anytime something is strategic, it's organizational goals. There's a focus on something at the organizational level. You're trying to achieve some type of organizational goals. Okay. So for me, based on me saying organizational goals a dozen times, this one jumps out at me, but let's take a look. Short-term cost reduction, yeah, possibly, but it could also talk about developing more profit. Okay, so something strategic, high level, could be good, like good such as profit, or it could be reducing costs. So we don't know based on that. So that's probably not enough. Okay, little X there. I already said this one's kind of good. Aligning practices with goals. Yeah, that one definitely sounds like it. Employee satisfaction, no, that's about employees. It's not about the org. Compliance with labor laws, no, it's kind of narrow. Job specialized no. Okay, there we go. So anything strategic is about achieving organizational goals. Okay, this one, fill in the blank to complete the definition of human resource management. Okay, so this is just the definition from the textbook. This one, I have to admit, this was kind of a stinker of a question. But so this is verbatim from the textbook. Hey, the leadership and management of people within an organization, within an organization using systems, methods, processes, and procedures that blank employees to optimize their performance and in turn their contribution to their organization and its goals. So it's something that you want this to occur, right? Like based on reading this, this definition is all about you use these mechanisms, is what I said in class, to enhance you want the following to occur. You want employees to optimize their performance, okay? So possibly promote could work, possibly enable. You don't want to force them. You don't want to constrain them, possibly motivate. Okay. Now that's kind of like the first pass as to what we are looking at. Now let's think about this a little bit more. Okay. Let's do it like a second run through of this to see what makes the most sense. Okay. The leadership and management of people within an organization using systems, methods, processes, and procedures that promote employees to optimize. That kind of sounds weird. Promote employees, because promote employees makes it sound like you're trying to give somebody a new job, you're promoting them. So I'd probably remove that one. That enable employees, enable is kind of like saying that it allows employees to optimize. So I think that kind of makes sense. Do you want to motivate employees to optimize their performance and turn their contribution to the organization and its goals? Hmm. I'm going to cheat. I actually remembered it was enable. But I think it is quite close between motivate and enable for this particular question. Okay, so I said it was a stinker when I was first going through it because in this case, both of these words are close. Enable is slightly better because you're allowing employees, HR is all about allowing, trying to foster, allow them to conduct this work. HR isn't necessarily about motivating employees to do this. That's more about leadership. Leadership is all about how can you motivate others to perform, engage in their task and conduct their work to a higher level. HR is simply facilitating that. So here's the rules to follow in order for employees to optimize their performance, but it's not necessarily pushing them to do so. So enable is slightly better, but again, I think it is, I do think this question was challenging. Okay, this next one, in the context of HR metrics, what does the term turnover rate refer to? So anytime we talk about turnover, these are folks that leave the organization. Post midterm, we're going to talk about the difference between voluntary and involuntary turnover. So forget about those nuances for now. Turnover is strictly about people leaving the organization. Okay, so are they satisfied? No. It's not about recruitment. Not about recruitment. Yeah, that's how many leave, how many employees were terminated. So this is close. Okay. So when an organization terminates an employee, that's referred to as involuntary turnover. So that's half of the turnover question because that's forcing people to leave. There's also voluntary turnover. So that one's not the answer as well. So anytime we talk about turnover and don't put the word voluntary or involuntary in front of it, uh, turnover is strictly people that leave. If we talk about voluntary turnover, people who choose to leave the organization. If we talk about involuntary turnover, that's people who are forced to leave, such as when they're, downsized or terminated. Okay, that was chapter one. That was straightforward. Okay, let's go to chapter two. Which of the following methods is not commonly used for conducting job analysis? Okay, so there were multiple different forms of data that we talked about. We talked about interviews. Absolutely, you definitely are going to want to interview folks to better understand Actually, maybe let's take a step back. Okay. Oh man, I forget what the license plate was that you had to remember in order to remember the steps for job analysis. But the first step was background information. You're collecting background information to get a better understanding as to how you're going to interpret the data that you collect later on. Two is identifying the jobs that are to be selected. Okay, so remember I talked to Jack Astor's, the restaurant is the bartenders at the server. Okay, you're selecting the job that's going to be analyzed. Three is collecting the data. That's what we're talking about in this question. Four is validating that data. Okay, so once you have data, you go to another source to try to validate it to make sure that the data is accurate, believable, valid, reliable, such. Five is to package the job analysis into a job description, and then six is to communicate it outwards. Okay, good. Now that we reviewed the steps in line with job analysis, let's keep going here. Surveys, questionnaires, yes, we talked about that as well. Observation, yes. Performance appraisal, no. An employee diary, sometimes referred to as logs. Okay, do you guys remember what the last? There was one more here, the last one here. You guys remember it? The NOC, National Occupation Classification. It's not included in the question, but that's another method for conducting job analysis or another form of data that's to be collected. Real quick, pros and cons associated with each of these are actually, here we go. I got this next question. I'll cover this next question, then I'll go through the pros and cons of each of these. Which of the following is a disadvantage of using job analysis questionnaire? Okay, so this, here we go. It's up here. Surveys or questionnaires. What's the disadvantage of it? It can gather a large amount of data. That sounds like a pro to me. It allows for anonymity. That sounds like a pro to me. Responses may lack depth. Yeah, that's not good. Is time consuming to analyze? That sounds like a pro to me. It requires less training than interviews. That sounds like a pro to me. Yeah, okay. So there, oh, well, look at that. I forgot even to highlight the answer for the first one. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so real quick, the pros and cons associated with each of these forms of data. So interviews are, kind of the opposite here. Interviews, you can get what's referred to as rich data because you can ask questions and then you can ask questions on questions and change your questions to based on people's responses. You can get really rich data and get really granular information as to what people are talking about. The limitation associated with that, it's incredibly time consuming and it requires skill from an interviewer as well. People can lie in interviews when you're asking them questions. Part B. So surveys and questionnaires, you have all the pros right here in the question below, right? The ones that are not bolded. Gather a huge amount of data, allows for anonymity. It's very time consuming, requires less training. Typically, it's also cheaper because it requires fewer resources. Big issue with surveys is one, responses may lack depth. Two, you can't change the questions as you go along. Three, people can still lie. Okay, direct observation doesn't have respondent bias, but it has observer bias. You might only be observing people for a shorter period of time. You're not going to be sitting beside them for, months on end. The pro is that people can't lie. You're observing them. You're watching them, right? So in some ways, it can be more objective or at least subjective from the observer perspective. Performance appraisal, that's nothing. Employee diaries, kind of similar observations that you're typically tracking people or prompting them to record information at specific time intervals, which can be helpful because you're looking at trends over time, but at any specific interval or specific situation, it isn't necessarily captured in the log. What's another benefit? People can lie, and these really depends on who's collecting the data. Typically, it's the respondent, so the actual employees collecting the data, so they can lie. Yeah, those are kind of the pros and cons there. Okay, good. And it's always better to triangulate the data collection. Always collect multiple forms of data. Never just collect one and rely on one source of data. What is the primary goal of job design? Okay, so job design I described as a twofold design, strategy, activity, exercise. One, it's to help out the organization. Is two, is to help out the employee. So from an organizational perspective, trying to increase the efficiency, increase the productivity, reduce the costs associated with the organization. So it's all organizational outcomes. The second is to improve the job satisfaction, meaningfulness, enjoyment, engagement, things that benefit the employee. Okay, so keeping those two things in mind to maximize employee turnover. No, we don't want people to leave. We want people to stay to improve the job satisfaction. Good. I like how this is talking about two things. One's about the org, one's about the employee. So that one sounds good to me. To reduce the number of employees needed. I don't know what. No, that's just totally wrong. To create more complex job roles. What's interesting is that's okay. I guess I get what this part C is. So this part C is all about increasing efficiency. So yeah, that's part of it, but that's only the organizational perspective to create more complex job roles. So that's interesting that is typically a task or one element of job design to create more complex roles. So we could talk about that in terms of job enlargement, for example, to minimize training, but that's not the answer for this particular question. To minimize training requirements. Perhaps if it was the idea of trying to decrease the variety of somebody's tasks. So again, that's incorrect, but it could be a sub component of job design. But this part B is definitely the one that speaks to it overall. You're helping out you can either. So I say and here because job design is a part of job design includes both of these elements. However, it does not have to include both in order for it to be considered job design. If you're focusing exclusively on trying to ramp up the efficiency of a production line, it's still job design. If you're trying to focus exclusively on trying to improve the satisfaction or meaningfulness of your workers, that is considered job design. You don't have to do both of these, right? But broadly speaking, they're both key components of job design. Four, which of the following concepts involves increasing the variety of tasks in a job? Specialization is nothing. Job enrichment is about increasing the meaningfulness or satisfaction of one's work. Variety could technically increase it, but we don't specifically say that, so that's a no. Job rotation is about rotating jobs. No. Enlargement, yes, this is exactly what it is. Enlargement is all about trying to increase the variety of tasks in a job. Task delegation, I think I that is not a job design technique. One thing I will say is that in the past I have done something like increasing the variety of tasks in a job, and I use this word as part of the concept. So I would say like job variation, right? Or it's to increase the meaningfulness of somebody's job. I would say job meaning or so, I don't know, something like that. Okay, where I try to combine the two and I try to make it sound closer to what it is. Don't be thrown off by that, or don't be thrown off by that. Make sure that you know um, all of the job specialized or job design techniques that we talked about in class. Okay, job enrichment, job simplification, job rotation, job enlargement. Okay, those are the big ones. Yeah. HR planning, one of my favorite concepts or favorite topics. I don't know if I have this question. Do I have it? Okay, I won't say it yet. So what is the primary objective of HR planning? HR planning. Okay, so I will say, okay, so HR planning is all about the bathtub, right? You remember, so HR planning is, akin to a bathtub. In order to increase or decrease the water in a bathtub, right, is akin to HR planning, increasing or decreasing the number of employees in an organization. So if you want to increase the water in a bathtub, you plug the drain, open the tap, more water flowing into the tub, water goes up. If you want to decrease the water in the tub, you turn off the tap, no water going in, pull the plug on the drain, water goes out, the amount of water in the tub decreases. The same thing takes place in an organization for HR planning. If you want to increase the number of employees in the organization, you plug the drain, you encourage people to stay, and you start hiring and bringing more people in. The number of people in the organization goes up. Conversely, if you want to decrease the water in the tub or number of employees in the organization, turn off the tap. Okay, don't hire any more people and pull the plug, encourage people to leave, downsize, retire, terminate, early retirement, things like that. And the number of people in your organization will go down. Okay, so the primary objective of HR planning is trying to match the number of employees in the organization with organizational goals. So you're trying to ensure that you have the right number of employees in order to achieve everything the organization wants to achieve next year or in the future. Okay, so it's those two components, the number of people in the organizations with achieving an organizational outcome. Okay, keeping those two things in mind. Let's go through it. To improve employee satisfaction. I don't think I talked anything about satisfaction. To align human resources with organizational goals. Yeah, that sounds good. So align human resources. Okay. That's the number of people in the tub, right? Along with organizational goals. So what you're trying to achieve. So here's the supply. Here's the demand, right, for next year. So that's what it is. To increase payroll expenses, no, you want to, that's not the main, but an objective is to decrease payroll expenses, to reduce employee turnover, possibly, depending if you have too many, if you have too much water in the tub, you don't want more people to leave, right? Enhanced recruitment strategy. Yeah, these are all different things depending on what you're trying to achieve. But you need to understand what the organizational goals are and what your supply of resources in order to achieve those organizational goals in order to determine which of these techniques you're going to use. Yeah. Which of the following is a key step in the HR planning process? Okay, cool. So let's go through those. Okay, so in order to establish what an HR plan is, I talked about this in class about if you were to throw like a football party or like a dinner party, what would you do? One, you're going to talk about how much food people are going to eat. Two, you're going to talk about whether you have the supplies in your fridge. I talk about pizza. Okay, how many pizzas are people going to eat? Okay, so the demand on pizzas, how many pizzas are people going to eat? But at the same time, do you have pizzas in your freezer that you're going to cook, or do you have to go out and acquire them, buy them? Okay. So one is about the demand on your food. The other is the supply. How much pizza do I have to supply to the group? So those two key components. Once you've established the demand and the supply, you figure out what the gap is. Okay. I'm going to need 10 pizzas. I currently have 5 pizzas, so I need to buy 5 pizzas, right? Like that's the gap, and then you address that gap afterwards. Okay. So kind of high level what the process of HR planning is. So one, um, is it to conduct exit interviews? Yeah, that's probably a very specific element of HR planning is trying to understand why people are leaving. To forecast future HR needs, yes, that's a key step because you're trying to figure out future HR needs or the demand. Okay, so that's how many pizzas am I going to need next year? Yeah. Implementing performance reviews, no. Establishing a training budget, no. Developing marketing strategies for selling products. Why are we talking about that with HR planning? Okay, there we go. Future HR needs. Another key step would be forecasting the supply. Okay, so this is the needs or the demand. We also have the supply and that, which isn't this one, sorry. I meant to just put a line here. So the needs or the demand, or the needs or the demand, same thing. The supply, the gap between those two, and then addressing the gap. Those are the main steps. Oh, speaking of the gap. Okay, what is a gap analysis in HR planning? So again, it's identifying the difference between the demands and the needs. Okay, so those two elements, we got to establish the difference between the two of them. So let's see if anything looks similar to that. Analyzing employee performance gaps. So we did not talk about performance. Identifying the difference between current and future workforce needs. So that's interesting. Okay, so there's nothing about, so this is talking about demand. There's nothing about supply, but I think it's pretty close because it's talking about current. Perhaps the current is associated with the supply. Similar, not the best word, but supply. Okay, there we go. So, but it's similar. So maybe that one. Evaluating employee satisfaction levels. Nope. Assessing training programs, measuring organizational culture. Okay, no, that one was, this one was pretty straightforward. Yeah, so you go with that one. Okay. Which of the following methods is commonly used for forecasting HR needs? Okay, so needs are the same as demands in order to, okay, so this one's a little tricky, right? Well, it's not really tricky, but you just need to know your stuff, okay? So job rotation is completely wrong. That's a job design technique. But if you remember in class, and you probably studied this topic, you're going to say, hey, ratio analysis absolutely was in HR planning, Markov analysis absolutely in HR planning. And if you're not detailed, you'd probably like, boom, it's D. That's what I'm going to circle. But that is not actually correct. Okay. The ratio analysis, okay, so this is where we're differentiating between the needs and the supply. Okay. So the ratio analysis is trying to establish a ratio between your current sales and the number of employees you need in order to make that sale. So remember, when we're doing these ratio analysis questions in class or during your TA workshop, it's all about trying to figure out how many employees are we going to need in order to sell 10,000 Big Macs? How many employees are we going to need in order to sell 100,000 pairs of jeans? Okay, so this is how many we're going to need, or the demand or the needs. So that's in line with the question. The Markov analysis is trying to establish, okay, what is our current supply of what's our current supply of employees? So based on how many we have this year, what is our supply going to be next year? Okay, so how many employees are we going to have next year without any recruitments or selection efforts? How many are we going to have next year? Okay, so the key thing here is we're asking about needs. If we were asking about supply, then it would be Markov. If we were asking about analyses for HR planning in general, then it would be both. Okay. You just have to read the question carefully. Okay, legal requirements. Which of the following is protected under the grounds of Canadian human rights legislation? I don't have any really big tips for this question other than the idea that you'll have to know it. Uh, Yeah, so there you go. So it's not education, not physical appearance, not personal interests, work experience. No, it's just marital status. Any tips for that? No, I don't. Sorry. Okay, 21. Which of the following is not considered a form of harassment? Okay, so harassment, what was the definition exactly? It was something like the idea of it could be a behavior or comment, an unwelcomed behavior or comment that a reasonable person would think is unwelcomed. A behavior or comment that a reasonable person would think is unwelcomed. Okay? I'm sure that's not the exact wording from the textbook, but it's the idea that it's a something you say or something you do that's unwelcomed, and that a reasonable person would also deem that thing you said or did to also be unwelcomed. Okay. Okay, so based on that, it could be something you say, and which is not considered a form of, or it could be a verbal abuse. Yeah, that could be, so that's not it. Unwanted physical contact, no, absolutely not. Constructive feedback, uh, that is helpful, even if it's not the easiest to hear. It is helpful. It's not attacking a person. It's attacking an activity, a work activity. It's not attacking. It's built. It's critiquing something somebody has done rather than who somebody is. Threats, no, that's not nice. Humiliating comments, no. This is okay. So this one was pretty straightforward because the distractors were, quite aggressive. So there you go. What type of harassment is sexual in nature and results in some direct consequence to a worker's employment status or of gain or loss of tangible benefit? Okay, so there was two forms of sexual harassment, which we described in detail in class. All right, so sexual coercion was one that related to a job benefit. If I was the manager of a restaurant, I'm going to give my staff if I was a manager in a restaurant, I'm going to give preferential treatment. I'm going to give preferential job shifts to a server who's willing to go on a date with me. So I'm giving them shifts, which they can make more money in exchange for a date. Okay, so there is a transaction taking place, and one person gains or loses from a tangible job benefit, such as preferential treatment shifts, shift timing makes more money on tips. Okay. Sexual annoyance is similar, that the comment or behavior could be of sexual nature, but does not have any sort of tangible job benefit. So it would be the idea of going over and giving somebody a hug when they ask for it, ask for you not to give them a hug. You're at the same level as them, so it's not like you're going to punish them by taking away their, job opportunities or work opportunities, something along those lines. Okay, so it's the idea that typically sexual coercion is of when people are at a different level of hierarchy and you can impact their job more so. It doesn't have to be. Typically it is. Okay, so based on this, um, this example is harassment, direct consequence of workers' status or some gain or loss. Okay, so we just said it impacts the tangible job benefits. That's sexual coercion. Sexual annoyance is when there is no impact to a job benefit. Sexual discrimination, I just made that up. Indirect. Ooh, I think I started losing track of possible distractor items, so I just made up the word indirect. I guess I could have really thrown you off and put direct here, but those are not correct. I think I tried to do indirect and then direct because we talked about indirect and direct discrimination. We did not talk about in terms of sexual harassment. Okay, so again, this is an example of how I'm trying to confuse you by bringing up terms that we also discussed in that chapter, um, but not in relation to this topic. So direct discrimination is something, it's like a form of discrimination you can like reach out and touch. It's tangible. It is like saying, "Hey, I'm going to give all the the men in my class 5% bonus on the exam." I would be directly discriminating against women in my class, right? So that's a form of direct discrimination. Indirect discrimination, sometimes referred to as systematic discrimination. It's the idea that you are embedding discrimination within the culture or a policy in your organization, and that policy or culture is what then discriminates against the employee. So we talked about this from an airline stewardess perspective, in the sense of if you implemented a job requirement that was unrelated. If you what was it? If you added a job requirement that's beyond the actual needs or tasks of a particular job. So for example, if physically you only had to lift something at your job that was 10 pounds, okay, and you only had to lift it like once a day for like 2 minutes, 10 pounds. And if you had a job requirement, and if you said that within your job description or job posting that somebody needed to lift something at least 40 pounds, okay, and you're only looking at people who lift things 40 pounds, that would be indirectly discriminating against women because physiologically men are stronger than women. And in doing so, you'd be indirectly discriminating against women who are not able to lift as much weight. Okay, so that would be a form of indirect discrimination. Okay. Maybe I'll capture it somewhere here because we're talking about B4s now. Okay, so which of the following is an example of a B4? B4 is a bona fide occupational requirement. So bona fide occupational requirement. There's your B form. Okay. So a bona fide occupational requirement is a legitimate, a legal reason for why you're able to, no, not why you're able to. A bona fide occupational requirement is a situation where you are legally allowed to discriminate against a group of people. Okay, so there is an intrinsic need in the job that forces you to have a specific requirement in the job which can indirectly discriminate against certain people, and it's allowed because it's an intrinsic component of the job. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these and figure out which one is actually an example. Hiring only men for a position because the manager believes men are more competent. No, because the manager thinks that. No, that is wrong. Requiring a valid driver's license for a delivery person. No, that sounds like, oh wait, that one sounds good. Requiring a valid driver's license for a delivery person. Yeah, that sounds like something you would need. You would need a valid driver's license in order to be a delivery driver. That makes sense. Preferring candidates from a specific university. Now, why not another university? That actually reminds me of the video we showed from Suits, where Harvey's only interested in people from Harvard. Choosing candidates based on their age. What's age got to do with it? Discriminating against candidates with a specific accent. Unless you have I was going to make a joke that was inappropriate. Yeah. So in this case, it seems like requiring a valid driver's license. Okay. So that's the one. Okay. In the past, I've done, what other ones have I done? Uh, in class, we talked about the idea that you need vision in order to be a driver or a pilot. I've talked about the stewardess example. You need to be a specific height. I've talked about policemen, firefighters needing to be able to lift a certain amount of weight as a component of their job. You just anytime when we talk about strength or like lifting or something like that, it needs to be it needs to be definitive that is a key component of a job. Because if I say, hey, you need to be able to lift 50 pounds, but in your role you only lift 20 pounds, that's not a B4. That is a form of indirect discrimination. Okay, so you just gotta be careful with that. How long have we been going here? Not sure. Okay. So what is the primary goal of employee recruitment? Employee recruitment. Okay, so most people confuse, not most people confuse, but sometimes books use the idea recruitment and selection synonymously. They are different. Recruitment is getting people to apply for a particular job posting. Okay, as soon as people have applied, recruitment is done, and that's where selection takes over. So recruitment is trying to attract and get people to apply for a job. Once people have applied for the job, selection takes over. And the selection process is all about trying to select from the people who have applied who is the best fitting person for the position you are hiring for, position or positions you are hiring for. Okay, so keeping in mind, it's always trying to attract and get people to apply for a job. What's the primary goal? To reduce employee turnover? No. To attract qualified, that sounds pretty good. Sounds similar to what I was saying. To increase organizational diversity? No, that's not the primary goal. That could be a goal, depending on the organization, to enhance employee engagement. No. To hire job candidates? No, that sounds more like selection. And there we go. That's how I differentiated the two. One thing that's, how I kind of before, so this is one technique, you don't have to use it at all, but one thing you'll hear me do or see me do, hear me do, both, is I read the question and I already start thinking in my head, okay, well, what is that core element of the question that we're talking about? Okay, so employee recruitment, I'm immediately differentiating that from selection, even before looking at the options. Okay, I have no clue what the options are, and I'm just thinking about in my head, what's the core concepts that we're trying to cover here. Sometimes it's going to be helpful, sometimes it's not, but it's making sure that these distractions are not distracting you when you're thinking about this key idea. Okay, it's one technique to help you do better on your multiple choice questions. Okay, let's do it again and see whether it helps out. Which of the following best describes internal recruitment? Okay, so there's two forms of recruitment, internal and external. There's two broad categories. Internal is within the org. External is everybody outside the organization. Okay, but internal is inside the organization. Okay. Which of the following best describes hiring from external job markets? Well, the word external is in here, so that's a big no. Promoting or transferring existing employees. That sounds like it's inside the organization, so that's like a big yes. Using recruitment agencies. No, you probably if they were within the organization, you would know the staff, you would know people, you wouldn't need to hire a recruitment agency. You would just know people inside the organization. You'd have a network already, so you wouldn't rely on the agency. Advertising on social media, I guess technically you could do that to recruit internally, but you wouldn't use social media if you're really posting a job. You'd probably use like your intranet or some type of server or email within the organization. So you wouldn't use social media. You could, but you wouldn't. Conducting campus recruitment, no, that's more for Again, hiring people from university to a job, to an organization. Okay, so only one here did we really talk about the idea of any type of filling a role with from people within the organization already. What is a key advantage of using social media for recruitment? Ooh, so this is a good one. Okay, so this is okay. So again, without reading any of the following options, what do I think about when I read social media for recruitment? Okay, um, external. Okay, people outside the organization. Okay, um, you can. What can you do with social media? Social media is all about like interacting with different people outside of an organization. It doesn't have to be necessarily beside the organization. You can reach people from a large, a large location or a large geography, um, because you can reach out to people from like, millions of people at a time. You probably could find like specific demographics you might be interested in. So your social media could target people who only shop at, Amazon, I don't know where people shop, or people that buy milk, or people that are younger or older, or people that, you can target this because you have such a massive grouping of people that you can recruit from via social media versus, walking to a corner store and only targeting people that walk in and out of that corner store. Okay. All right. So what's a key advantage? Limited reach? No, it is a massive reach. Um, let's see. Is it high cost a key advantage? High cost is an advantage? No, high cost would be a disadvantage. Ability to target specific demographics? Yes. That one might not jump out at you based on how I described it. It's quite clear, but when you're using social media, you're targeting specific demographics. Even social media, you could even say like something as simple as like males, right? Like think of when you use social media, think about it in terms of not necessarily recruitment. Think about it in terms of like marketing. Do people use social media to like market a product up towards a certain targeted audience? Absolutely. It's the same premise for recruitment. Reduced visibility? No, this is what increased visibility. Slower application process. It's kind of a weird phrase. I don't know why that's related to recruitment. So no, that's not it. Okay, the ability to target specific demographics. 40. Which recruitment method allows employers to assess candidates in a real world environment? Okay. So this one, I specifically remember this question and receiving a lot of questions back from students not knowing this one. So let's look at this one in detail. In a real world scenario. So we're talking all about recruitment. Okay. Recruitment. Okay, so let's see. A recruitment. Okay, so let's see. Well, let's go first. Okay, job fairs. Okay, so a job fair could be a form of recruitment. Yeah. So is it okay? So let's go back. I'm sorry. Let's take a step back. Which recruitment method? So let's go through one at a time to talk about which of these are recruitment methods. Okay, job fair, recruitment method. Yes. An internship. Is it a recruitment method? Hmm. It's not like a formal recruitment method, like trying to solicit people through a job fair or a camp, a university fair or something along those lines. However, it could be a method for recruiting people for after university. Okay, so it's like a probation. You're testing them out before deciding whether you're going to get them to, join your organization as a career after school. So I would say yes. Online job postings, yes. Telephone interviews, no. Okay. Telephone interviews are the selection process, not recruitment. And recruitment agencies, yes. Okay. So I only got rid of one of them by, I thought maybe it could do more by differentiating recruitment and selection. Okay. Next, to assess in a real world environment. Okay. So in this case, let's go from the bottom up. In this case, we're trying to see how people interact in real life. Okay. So in this case, a recruitment agency, so somebody outsourcing this to make sure that um, basically, somebody finds somebody on LinkedIn or a headhunter. That's not a real world scenario. Online job posting, again, if it's online, you don't get to see them, in action. Internship, yeah, that sounds good. So it's the idea that you're actually going to see people operate. You're going to see them work. You're going to see them interact, and you're still getting a more detailed understanding as to how they are, so that you can recruit them for after and trying to get them to apply once they're finished university. So that one sounds really good to me. Job fairs is also interesting because you can actually see people in action when you're asking them questions. You see how they act, see how they dress, see how they are, but it's not really they're not really working. Okay, so if I had to pick one, I would go with internships. Okay, because you can actually see them work versus see them in real life, but not really work. All right, last chapter that we're covering. Okay, employee selection, like we talked about in class, employee selection is a process, kind of like an obstacle course, or I had the little figure of people running over hurdles, that there was like 6 or 7 different steps in the selection process. Each step or each filter decreases the number of applicants to help uh, to decrease the number of potential to decrease the number of applicants throughout the employee selection process in order to find the best fitting applicant for a particular position, okay, or positions. Now, I think some of these questions relate to specific steps. Let's see which one. Which of the following selection methods is considered the most valid for predicting job performance? Hmm. Oh, I'm sorry. Tired. Which of the following employee selection methods? Okay, so these are different steps. I'm highlighting different steps here. I guess not always different steps. The most, okay, so some of these are different steps, like reference checking with job simulation is similar to perform personality test. And then this is social media is like a pre-screening, kind of similar. I'm not sure whether it's pre-screening. It uses the word screening, so it kind of sounds like pre-screening, but it could also be used for like a reference check piece at the end. So So I don't know. Based on this question, it's this is unclear. So for me, there's only one that didn't get highlighted, is suggesting that it's the same step twice. But let's keep going here. So which of the following selection methods is considered the most valid for predicting job performance? So if you're trying to predict job performance, let's go through these. Okay, so one, personality test doesn't really talk about performance. Two is a structured interview. You could because you ask people about previous performance, previous activities, previous, yes. The word structured also is kind of nice because, okay, so there's there's 3 different types of interviews in terms of structure, the structure of an interview. A structured interview is where you ask the exact same questions to each interviewee. Okay, so say you have 10 questions. You cannot deviate from those questions, right? The benefit is that because you're asking those same 10 questions to everybody, you have the same response from respondent one. How did they answer question one? You ask it. Each person will answer the same set of questions. So you can compare responses across every respondent. Okay. An unstructured interview is where it gives the interviewer flexibility to add as many questions as they want. Typically, you have like 1 or 2 questions to kick off an unstructured interview, and then you add all these different questions based on responses. The pro is that you can get dived really deep and get rich information from them. Um, because you're essentially customizing every interview for each respondent. The big negative is that they're so difficult to compare across interviewees because everybody's interview is different and you don't ask the same questions across every person. A semi-structured interview is kind of like the best of both worlds. A semi-structured interview typically has some questions that are fixed that you have to ask everybody, and other questions gives the flexibility to add more questions based on how people responded. So you might have, say, like 6 questions that you have to ask, but then you can, come up with 4 questions during the interview to get a little more nuance in terms of how people are feeling. I would say that because it's talking about structured, actually, it makes this more valid um, because we're going to get exactly what we want to get. It actually increases the opportunity to get what we're looking for when it comes to job performance. Okay. Now, let me take a quick note, although we're not talking specifically about validity here. I'll take a quick minute to talk about validity versus reliability. Okay. We talked about validity and reliability a little bit within the job analysis, but this is also here. Anytime you're trying to measure something, it comes in important. Okay. I talk about this in terms of a dartboard. Okay. So if you're throwing darts at a dartboard, you're typically trying to hit the bullseye. Okay. Now, if you hit the bullseye, say you throw one throw and you hit the bullseye, that would be referred to as having high validity. So validity is all about trying to obtain information related to what you're trying to obtain information on. I know that's confusing, okay? But it's the idea of if you're trying to throw a dart at a dartboard and you hit the bullseye, that's where you're aiming, then you have a good validity. If you're trying to hit the bullseye and you hit here, that would be having poor validity. You're trying to hit the bullseye and you miss. Okay. I'm trying to ask you a question about your performance, and the answer you give me is about why you showed up for work late, which isn't directly related to performance. It could be, it's like indirectly related, but it's not perfectly directly related. So maybe the wording of my question was bad. Okay. Now, conversely, if reliability is so if validity is the how accurate you are, reliability is your consistency. Okay. So if I throw a bunch of darts back to back to back and they all end up here, they have poor validity because they're not accurate to the bullseye, but they have high reliability because they're very consistent. You're consistently hitting the same spot, even though it's a bad spot, every single time. Okay. So reliability is when you're creating a question or some form of measurement tool, like a survey, and you are getting responses from people, how consistent is the response that you're getting? So if I'm asking people a question about job performance, right, and not just one person, but everybody answers about, hey, I showed up for work late, and you're talking about whether you're showing up for work late and not about your actual performance, that would be deemed to have a very consistent response. Everybody's asking you must be, and you might want to consider changing your wording because it's very consistent the response you're getting, but it's not necessarily the valid, or you're not getting what you want to get. Okay? Again, okay, so that's the validity versus reliability. Kind of deviated from this question, but anyways, so I think B could be it. Reference checks. Reference checks are actually found to be pretty, not really that valid, not really that reliable, because one, you're only going to give referee details to people you know that are going to give you a good review. So why would, so they're going to be biased. Okay. Job simulations. Hmm. That's kind of cool. It could be valid. The only thing is, I'm wondering about job performance. It really depends on what your performance is. I guess in some jobs, if you were like a pilot and you could really simulate that activity, yes, it could be good. But if you were actually, you could probably simulate all jobs now, or most jobs, like a cashier, a cleaner, something along those lines. But is it the most valid? Well, since you know that it's in like a controlled environment, you're probably likely to act differently than you would in a real world scenario. I put that as a possible option. Social media screening, how you act on social media isn't really affecting your performance. Okay. So I would say if a quick review, it's down to these two. I would say that structured interview, the fact that it's a structured interview kind of makes this more valid. It's easier to compare across people, okay, versus job simulations, but both of them were pretty close. Okay. What is the purpose of pre-employment screening? Okay, so pre-employment screening is typically the second step. Okay, so everybody applies for the job. They can either use a CV or resume to apply or an employment application. The second step is a pre-screening. Pre-screening is all about trying to filter out people that do not meet the must-haves or the criteria associated with the job. So you can separate the must-haves from the wants, or it's a plus or it's a bonus, and you're focusing specifically on the must-have. So in class, I talked about the idea that when I applied for this job as a professor, you needed a PhD. Okay. So go through one at a time, go through each employment application. Okay, does this person have a PhD? Yes. Yes, pal. Do they have a PhD? Yes. Yes, pal. Do they have a PhD? No. The no, pal. I'm pre-employment screening them. Okay, so I'm making sure that they have all the minimum requirements for the job. Okay, or the minimum, yeah, making sure they have the minimum requirements for the job. Okay. Okay, so let's see whether any of these relate to that. To evaluate the candidate fit with company culture. Culture is not a minimum, not a minimum qualification. It'd be difficult to establish. Meet the minimum qualification. Yeah, I took the words out of my mouth. That sound good. Team compatibility. That could be more aligned with a personality test or another form of test, or an interview. Comes later. To conduct background checks only. Background checks. Uh, that's interesting. It's more of a reference checking at the end of the interview. It's not about screening and making sure people are meeting the minimum requirements. You know what I mean? It's the mental and physical requirements of the job. That'd be testing. It could be the testing, or it could be the contingent assessments. Anyways, that's not that one. In any case. All right, I think this is my last slide. Okay. Which of the following is a common method for receiving applicants, receiving applicants? I think it should be applications. At the start of the employee selection process, uh, the resume, also referred to as a CV, yes. Realistic job preview, no. A realistic job preview is when the organization or employer tries to give applicants a better understanding as to what they can expect when they're actually starting working. This can be a video, this can be a conversation with new hires, this can be even potentially like job shadowing or observations for a day. Okay. It's not associated with receiving applicants. So in an employment application, yeah, that's correct. So it's A and C. What? Which of the following is a wow, let me see. Did I mess up? Which of the following is a common method for receiving applicants at the start of the employee selection process? Yes, there's an error. It should be A and C. There's two different ways: an employee resume as well as an employment application. So employee resume is where you um, free form employees can or applicants can write whatever they want in a two-page document. It could be more than that. So to simplify, two-page document, write whatever you want, your name, your title, your contact information, where you've worked, your education. You can write it however you want, be as creative as you want. An employment application, these are prefixed cells where they're asking you predetermined pieces of information. Typically, employment application details are used to filter out people within the pre-screening process, but more advanced forms of technology can scrape your employee resume and pre-screen from there as well. In any case, this is an error. It should be D. Both A and C are ways that employees can apply for a job. Yeah. Last one, which step in the employee selection process immediately precedes interviews? Okay, so in this case, caveat, um, although I articulate and talk about there being a specific set of steps, in reality, not all organizations follow the set of steps I talked about in class. Some steps are in reverse order, some steps are included in the SEM process, other steps are not. This particular question talks about the set of steps specifically talked about in class. This is the most common order for which they occur, but it doesn't have to be. Okay, so let's actually put these in order. So the preliminary reception of applicants, okay, is one, and that can be, and that's this question up here. That could be through a resume or an employment application. Um, Applicant screening is number two. So that we also refer to as pre-screening. So based on what people have submitted, you screen to make sure that everybody has the minimum level requirements. Do you have a bachelor's degree? Do you have a PhD? Do you speak English or French? Things of that nature. Employment tests is typically number three. Okay. Employment tests validate what is said in the first two steps. If you say you can speak French in the employment applicant screening stage, this is where you have a French test to make sure you can actually speak French. From here, three, typically interviews are four. Okay, there's many different types of interviews. You can have multiple rounds of interviews. You can have a telephone interview, a video interview. You can have an in-person interview. You might have multiple rounds of in-person interviews, one with the HR, one with the manager. I didn't get into that level of details, but that's typically four. Um, and then you might have the realistic job preview. Typically, it follows the interview stage directly. You're pretty close when you're getting to this point and you're getting realistic job preview. Realistic job preview, I talked about it earlier. But essentially, you're empowering the applicant to walk away from the employee selection process. Okay? Six is verifying references. Okay. Again, people typically only talk to references when you've either got the job offer or as a final step to ensure that people are ready right before a job offer comes. One that isn't on here is a contingent assessment. Seven is contingent. Contingent assessment is just making sure that from a formality perspective, perhaps within the legality of the legal requirements of a particular job, you must demonstrate that you have a negative drug test, something along those lines. Okay. And then the last step, if you wanted a last step, is the hiring. Okay. Yeah, a manager might do this, the actual selection of the hiring. A panel might do the selection of the hiring. It really depends on the context for what's being hired in the organization. Okay, so what's the question? Which steps in the employee selection process immediately precedes, so where's the three employment tests? I got that one right at least. All right, guys, that is it. I hope you found this review helpful. Um, yeah, good luck on the final exam, or good luck on the midterm. Good luck on the final exam as well, but you don't have to worry about that yet. Good luck on the midterm. And again, it's a 2-hour exam, chapters 1 through 6, everything that we've covered so far, 10 questions per chapter. Good luck. I'll see you there.